Email fatigue is real. If your email nurture open rate is dropping, you're not alone. Get tips to rebound it in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, VP of Marketing for Unbounce and Insightly. Today, I'm joined by Jack Kosakowski. He is CEO of the U.S. division of the Creation Agency. Jack, welcome to the show.
Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, let's jump right in. Diminishing returns on email marketing nurtures. I feel like this is a theme for 2025.
Yeah.
You're seeing it with your clients. I can tell you that I see it with the brands that I manage. What do you think's going on?
I just think we're just flooded with emails. AI SDRs aren't making our life any easier, right? I think that's the big piece is the AI SDR, automated kind of things now. It's if you go to a website, now you're automatically getting an email. So not only were we getting bombarded by cold emails from actual real SDRs, but now AI is taking over and sending us emails in abundance. So I think what sucks for marketing now is that means what we're going to get diminishing returns as the quantities kind of bulk up. But I mean, there's a ton of things going against us, right? Tracking now the way that Google reads your emails, putting you in promotion tabs. I mean, there's a million things we could talk about, but yeah, diminishing returns, there's no way to beat it right now, unfortunately.
So let's talk about some practical ideas you have to be more strategic with your marketing nurtures. I'd like to dive in a little bit. First, you're saying that they should be shorter than what we may have been doing in practice.
Yeah, I think I just say traditional workflows or automation, a lot of times there's 5+ emails in a lot of cases, but just the way things are moving, fast is nurtures have to kind of change, right? They have to be a little bit more tactical. You need to have the right customer stories. You just got to be so much more relevant than you've ever had to be before. You've got to be more interesting. You got to be more entertaining. There's just the basic boring drips that most B2B SaaS companies have traditionally followed is dying. I mean, you'll see that in the numbers across the board. I have tons of clients that could show you their data. It's just not working. And the questions are always sitting in there going, okay, our database is deteriorating. How do we fix it? And more nurtures is not the answer.
Okay, so we're no longer throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks. We got to get more strategic so that, just checking in email, right? How do you recommend ways that we can provide value at scale in our marketing nurtures? Is it possible?
This is where your data and understanding, your segmentation as people come through, what is their intent? You've got to companies have to get better at really understanding who's in their database and being able to actually be relevant to what are these people looking for? There's so many times where I'll go in and I'll say, okay, if we work with a new company, it's okay, how do we segment off of a job title? How do we segment off of, different ICP metrics? And a lot of companies just don't have those. So I think more now than ever is really understanding your segments and then understanding what's actually relevant right now for those people. And we spend all this time on ebooks and all these different things, but how many, email marketers or demand gen people actually spend really good amount of time understanding who's in their database and what's relevant for them this month? And this is where I think my whole theory on automation and, drips and all that has kind of changed. It's less about setting it and forgetting it. And now it's more about okay, well, this week, what do we have coming out that's actually relevant? What data could we talk about that would move somebody from, stage 1 to stage 2 this week? What new case studies are we working on that are relevant for fintech that we can go and, use that customer video testimonial and send that to those people? There's a lot, and I guarantee you large organizations too, even the mid-market is there's a lot of content being created, but it's not properly being distributed through the email list, which would obviously up those numbers. That's the problem with the set it and forget it kind of, model of the automation and the, email drips is like, you set it and forget it, but like you come out with all this new relevant stuff. And the problem is it never gets re-implemented back into the email list. So that's why I'm like not against workflows, but that's why I just say, hey, like make them short and really focus on like, week to week, month to month. What are we creating now and what's going to have big impact and actually get people to open these emails and move, stages.
Okay. I'm totally guilty of set it and forget it. You work through an email nurture and you're like, okay, it's great. And you launch it and you think, okay, I don't have to touch that for a while, but What would you say is the right cadence for checking in on those nurtures?
Well, I would think you would have to do it, at least monthly minimum. A lot of times too, which I hate this, but it's like, oh, we made in the G2, whatever, we made a Gartner, like those things. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with companies where I've gone and looked at their workflows and been like, hey, this is like not even like, this is dated, But a lot of times what happens, especially in the larger orgs, is like they set these up and they forget about them. And, a lot of times the segments are getting emails with dated information, like dated reports, like this is in 2024, we're in 2025. Like, why are you still sending this? So I think that's where it comes down to relevance and, really understanding your segment. So like we did some stuff with like Zoom Info's demand gen on a webinar. And like, what he said was the hard part is like keeping the constant flow. Like they have a constant flow of new content coming out. So that means that they've constantly got to refresh 20, 30 nurtures. Think about that. That's like a disaster waiting to happen in my opinion, because like really the customer experience, let's say you came in through an inbound demo, you connected with an SDR, now you're in an automated drip and you're getting sent like case studies about industries that aren't like, you're not even interested in. Like right now you have a bad experience. So I think you've really got to think about nurtures as an experience and shut them off. Like if you don't know that it's a great experience and that it's going to move people from point A to point B, shut those nurtures off now. Maybe get more relevant on like one-off stuff and really focusing on those lists, just doing one-off emails. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. It's sometimes we think of email marketing as something that maybe you give that to a junior person on your team or, it's so important. It's really being invited into the inbox is such a compliment these days, right? It's the only place where the user is really in control. You're not in control of the ads you get served on social media, for example, but the inbox is your domain and you say what comes in and comes out. So when someone says, hey, you can come into that inbox, you really have to respect that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's true. But at the same point, making sure that like you respect the right people in there, right? Like I think a lot of companies, they are so worried about like, oh, how many new leads did we add to our database this month? Like, well, who cares? Like if 90% of them are people that could never buy, So I think that's where it comes in is like, you got to respect the 10% that have shown intent signals and you got to be really, really smart with those. Also, those that have engaged with sales. I think marketing and sales, a lot of times with the email, they have a kind of a disconnect. Marketing sending something out that might even be like contradicting or, it might be a different stage of the conversation that they're having in sales. So that's the hard part is like there's so much complexity. And to your point, there's a lot of junior people running email marketing databases at companies, especially large companies, where they don't even understand what sales, they don't even, understand what sales is talking to, who they're talking to. It's just like, okay, we have a quota. We need to send out an email this week. We need to make sure we're sending out an email each week. Well, do you? Like, that's not maybe necessarily even true, right? Like if you don't have the right things to send, why do you have to send every week? Maybe be more impactful. So there's just a lot of complexity. I think that's the hardest part about this conversation is like every organization is different when it comes to their email marketing database. But what I will say is that very few companies I've ever worked with have I ever said, wow, they're really good at email marketing. So that's a competitive advantage. I mean, there's a reason that B2B companies, I mean, you guys probably play into this role, is you'll go out and spend thousands of dollars with influencers or third-party media companies. And the reason you do that is because they have such great databases. And the media companies treat their databases a lot different than the SaaS companies. And that's why SaaS companies go out and pay the media companies thousands of dollars, because they've done such a great job with their database. So I think, B2B SaaS companies sometimes need to start looking more at their database as a media company versus like a sales database, which is like the way that a lot of people treat their email marketing databases, which is sad. Like, you shouldn't treat it like that.
That's a great point. So beyond content, I feel like the world is working against marketers in general with technology. So these mass unsubscribe services like Trimbox or Unroll Me, like, they're getting very popular.
Yeah, which they should, right? I mean, unfortunately, we're just getting cold email after cold email. We can't even keep up with cleaning our own like personal inboxes. So it makes sense. Companies with good content, across the board, whether that's, TikTok videos or blogs or whatever that is. Blogs are kind of a thing of the past, now in this new age. But whatever you're doing from a content perspective, if you're doing a good job and you really understand how your audience works, and your email marketing gets a lot easier. So as far as content goes, like, I don't think that there's like a one size fits all strategy for like an email marketing database, depending on what you're trying to get with your outcomes, right? Like, if you're just trying to increase your open rates and your deliverability, your engagement, that's like a whole different strategy than if you're like, okay, we're trying to increase our conversions. So content, it's kind of determined by that. For example, a lot more companies that we're seeing a lot of the success with is on the tactical and education side. Like, how are you engaging your users or your customers or your prospects? And, you're showing them how to do their job better, making them better personally and professionally. Like, those are the email lists people want to stay on. If they want to do a demo with you, I'm sorry, but it's not going to be usually coming from an email that you sent to them. It's going to be them, engaging with your webinar and reading your ebook and going and looking at, a video on how you fixed a problem that they have. And then they go to your website and they, fill out the demo form. Like, you can see that in all of your journeys. I'm sure you guys have, you see that. But it's like your email list, really, you got to be a resource to them. How are you being a resource? How are you showing them that you're going to, make them better personally and professionally? And if you can nail that side, you'll keep people on there. But most people just want to sell you. Like, they just look at it as like another extension of their sales team, which is essentially why everybody's got diminishing returns in the first place. So as far as content goes, like, I could go on for hours about what you could use, but, reach out to me if you have questions on that. I can tell you where we're seeing success.
So you gave this one practical tip that I thought was super interesting. It's about how you could use your sales email software versus your marketing automation software to send messages. Basically unsubscribing from one person versus unsubscribing from your whole company. That's a pretty good trick to have up your sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, that's where outreach comes in. A lot of people are using Outreach, Sales Loft. You obviously can't do as much marketing at scale, right? Like, you can't hit a 30,000 person list. But let's just say you want to nurture a certain segment of your customer base, and you're like, hey, we don't want them to opt out. Maybe that's your customer success person, doing their customer success workflows. It's like, hey, just want to check in, make sure that you've done this. Hey, notice you guys haven't done this yet. Instead of having that come from your marketing database, where if they opt out, you're just kind of screwed, right? Because once they opt out, they're gone. You really start to think about how to use the sales engagement platforms especially for individual emails. And the other thing is, like, we're even doing it for webinar invites, right? Like, having the SDR send out the webinar invite versus like the invite coming from the marketing database. And getting more strategic on how we use the marketing database so that we keep people engaged and not getting them to unsubscribe. And then it's like, okay, well, if they opt out of the SDRs, no offense to the SDR, or the CSM, but if like they opt out of there, like, we still have them on the marketing database. So yeah, I think you just got to get more strategic on how do you use other domains so that you don't lose these people forever, especially like your high value, targets, ICP.
So a question about, sometimes this happens to me as a consumer. How soon is too soon to add a prospect to an email nurture? Because sometimes I feel like we jump the gun a little bit here.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't have like the perfect answer to that. But what I will say is it all depends on how you define a prospect. And prospect can be defined in different ways. But prospect being, hey, they came to your website and they took, action and filled out a form, whether that be to go to a webinar, downloaded an ebook, a checklist or something like that, where they've self opted in. Well, that means they go into your marketing database, whatever you're using there. But I think the real question is like, you need to separate the two. So you're marketing marketing automation platform, and then like a tool like, Insightly, where you're sending that out one-to-one emails from your, and you could make persona. Like we work with, one of the largest SaaS companies in Arizona. And like one of the things they do is they have 10 marketing personas that they email from inside like an Insightly type tool, where they send that out. And, if somebody opts out of one, okay, no big deal. Like they didn't opt out of your main marketing automation platform. So I think that's where you really got to get strategic and have different platforms with different domains, so that you don't kill your main marketing database, because that is really, really important. So if it's cold, build personas, let your marketing team have access to a tool like Insightly so that they do push that out. But if it's warm and they're in your marketing automation database, that's a whole different story. You have a whole different strategy for that.
Jack, I love that. That's a really great practical tip our audience can take away today. So thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Closing Time.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Jack, if folks want to find you, where should they look? Social, your website, learn more about your agency?
Yeah, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Obviously, I'm pretty active on there. So I love to have conversations about this stuff. So anytime, any questions.
Awesome. And thanks to you for joining us on Closing Time. Remember, if you want this episode delivered right to your inbox, click the link in the show notes, and we will see you next week.